Welcome to my channel. With you, Paul Meenan. Excellent, dear listener. Get ready to immerse yourself in a world of intrigue, amusing situations, and unexpected twists. I, your humble servant, will guide you through the labyrinths of family life and office battles, where humor coexists with a touch of sadness. Settle in. The curtain is rising. Don't forget to leave a comment under the video, whether you liked the story or not. Chapter 1. Echoes of Office Battles. Still working late? You know, I could suggest far more exciting ways to spend this time, he said, an ironic arch to his eyebrow as he leaned against the doorframe of Eleanor's office. Mr. Davies's voice, the department head, was less insistent and more smug, as if he had just delivered a witty remark and was awaiting an enthusiastic reaction. On his face was that condescending smile that Eleanor had grown to despise over her 3 years working under him. It was the smile of a man absolutely confident in his irresistibility and undeniable superiority. And every time he displayed it, Eleanor felt a wave of righteous anger mixed with annoyance rising within her. Eleanor, without lifting her gaze from the stack of reports she was methodically reviewing, merely quirked the corner of her lips, a gesture that could be interpreted in any way, from a slight smile to a disdainful sneer. Her fingers continued to glide over the papers, betraying not the slightest hint of agitation. She was a master of composure, a quality that helped her survive in the office environment dominated by Mr. Davies. He was a classic example of his kind, successful, ambitious, slightly arrogant, and utterly convinced that the world revolved around him, and that women at work existed merely to adorn the interior and carry out his errands. I imagine your wife also has suggestions, Mr. Davies. Perhaps you should discuss it with her, Eleanor replied, calmly, her voice even, without a single note of irritation. She didn't even look up, continuing to make notes with a red pencil. This response was calculated to slightly cool her boss's ardor, to remind him that he had a family and perhaps other obligations besides workplace flirtation. Mr. Davies froze for a second, his smile fading slightly. He clearly hadn't expected such a direct and emotionless response. Usually, his barbed remarks elicited either embarrassment or a slight giggle, which gave him an excuse to continue the game. But Eleanor was different. She always kept her distance, never allowing herself any liberties, which created a strange mix of respect and irritation in Mr. Davies. He was accustomed to his charm being foolproof, but it seemed to have no effect on Eleanor. "Well then, Eleanor," he mumbled, clearing his throat slightly, trying to regain his former confidence. "I just wanted to say that you work too much. You need a break. All this paperwork has no end. Think about yourself." He tried to inject a caring tone into his voice, but Eleanor knew him too well. This was just another attempt to strike up a conversation, to move to a more personal level, which, in his opinion, should have broken through her icy armor. However, Eleanor was impenetrable. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Davies," she finally said, looking up. Her gaze was clear, piercing, but completely devoid of any emotion. "But as you yourself noted, this documentation is endless, and someone has to finish it. Unlike some, I prefer to work rather than be distracted." She uttered the last word with a barely perceptible intonation that could mean anything. Mr. Davies felt a slight sting, but tried not to show it. He understood that Eleanor was smart, devilishly smart, and outsmarting her in the verbal duel was not easy. However, he was not going to retreat. He was as stubborn as a mule, especially when it came to his male ego. "Eleanor, I'm just trying to be friendly," he said, drawing out the words as if to emphasize his goodwill. "We're colleagues, after all, and I'm your boss. I care about how you feel." "Oh, I feel perfectly fine, Mr. Davies. Honestly, even better than you can imagine," Eleanor replied, and a mysterious smile appeared on her face. This smile was completely new, and it made Mr. Davies wary. There was no hint of flirtation in it, no suggestion of embarrassment, only a slight, almost imperceptible irony that somehow made him inwardly shrink. He suddenly felt uncomfortable, as if some unknown variable had crept into his perfectly planned game. Eleanor, always predictable in her professional detachment, suddenly showed something that broke with the usual picture. That smile, that look, there was something in them that made him instinctively feel danger, though he couldn't pinpoint what it was. "Well, Eleanor," he said, trying to maintain his usual tone, but with less confidence. "If you think so, I'll go. I won't disturb you." And he, slightly embarrassed, left, leaving Eleanor alone with her reports and that new mysterious smile. Eleanor, watching him go, allowed herself to relax. She knew her answer had wounded his pride, and this was just the beginning. Her revenge plan, carefully nurtured for many months, began to take concrete shape. Mr. Davies did not know who he had tangled with, and Eleanor was ready to teach him a lesson he would remember for a long time. It would be a lesson not only for him, but for everyone who believes that women can be treated like pieces of furniture.
She lowered her gaze to the reports again, but her thoughts were far from numbers and graphs. Details of the upcoming operation were already swirling in her mind, an operation that was to be executed with grace, humor, and not the slightest hint of criminality. An operation that was to teach Mr. Davies a lesson without breaking a single law, except perhaps the law of his own peace of mind. That same mysterious smile appeared on her face again. She felt like a predator tracking her prey, and the prey, in the person of Mr. Davies, was completely unaware of the impending threat. He was so overconfident and blind in his arrogance that he didn't notice the signs Eleanor had already begun to send him. And that was perfect. The less he suspected, the more shocking the finale would be. Eleanor picked up her red pencil and made a mark in the corner of one of the reports. It wasn't a work-related note. It was a symbol of the beginning of her own little revolution. A revolution that was to show Mr. Davies that underestimating a woman was the biggest mistake of his life. Chapter 2. The Uninvited Guest and the Unexpected Encounter. The next day at the office passed relatively calmly. Mr. Davies tried to keep his distance from Eleanor, which suited her just fine. She continued her meticulous work, occasionally glancing at the clock. It was time for the next stage of her plan. After lunch, when most employees were returning from their breaks, a woman entered Mr. Davis's reception area. She was short, with a mass of red hair that kept trying to escape her messy bun. Her lively and mischievous eyes carefully surveyed the reception. She was dressed in a bright, slightly old-fashioned but very elegant dress that attracted attention. Mr. Davis's secretary, Miss Thompson, looked up from her desk. "May I help you?" she asked politely. "Good afternoon. I'm here to see Mr. Davies," the stranger replied cheerfully, her voice loud enough for Eleanor, sitting in her office with the door ajar, to hear the conversation clearly. "He's expecting me." Miss Thompson raised her eyebrow in surprise. She managed Mr. Davis's schedule and was sure he had no meetings planned with such an eccentric lady. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Davies doesn't have anyone in his schedule right now," she said, trying to maintain a professional tone. "How shall I announce you?" "Oh, just tell him his beloved Mabel is here," the red-haired lady replied with a wide smile. Her voice had a playful tone that left no doubt about her intentions. Miss Thompson, flustered, was momentarily at a loss. The name Mabel meant nothing to her, but the stranger's tone and confidence made the secretary feel awkward. She knew Mr. Davies disliked unexpected visits, but refusing this assertive lady was somehow uncomfortable. At that moment, the door to Mr. Davies' office slightly opened, and he himself peered out. He had clearly heard part of the conversation. Seeing Mabel, his face instantly changed. His smile vanished, and his eyes widened in surprise. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Mabel?" he mumbled, and his voice held so much genuine astonishment that even Miss Thompson noticed it. "Hello, darling. Didn't expect me?" Mabel cheerfully waved at him, then, without the slightest embarrassment at the secretary's presence, walked past her and confidently headed towards Mr. Davies' office. Mr. Davies, as if hypnotized, stepped back, allowing her to enter. The door closed behind them. Miss Thompson remained sitting in complete bewilderment. She shifted her gaze from the closed door to Eleanor, who, as if nothing had happened, continued to sort through her papers. But if Miss Thompson had looked more closely, she would have noticed a faint smile on Eleanor's lips and a sparkle in her eyes. From behind the closed office door, muffled voices began to be heard, then Mabel's laughter, and then Mr. Davies' louder, agitated remarks. Eleanor distinctly heard her boss's tone change from surprise to displeasure and then to an almost panicked whisper. About 15 minutes later, the office door swung open again. Mr. Davies stood on the threshold, his face crimson, his hair slightly disheveled. Mabel stood beside him, holding his arm, looking absolutely happy and content. "Miss Thompson," Mr. Davies said in a strained voice, trying to appear as unperturbed as possible. "Mabel and I have very important matters. Family matters." He uttered the last words in an intonation that made them sound like an excuse. Mabel, on the other hand, smiled happily and squeezed his arm. "Yes, darling, very, very important," she winked playfully. Mr. Davies, casting a nervous glance at her, hastily left the office, pulling Mabel along with him. They walked past Miss Thompson's desk, who was still sitting with her mouth agape, and headed for the exit. Before disappearing from view, Mabel turned around and, meeting Eleanor's gaze, sent her a subtle but definite wink. Eleanor responded with an equally composed but inwardly triumphant smile.
What happened in Mr. Davies' office? No one knew, but all the employees who witnessed this scene felt that something had changed. The air in the office was filled with invisible tension, mixed with curiosity. Rumors spread like wildfire. Who was Mabel? Where did she come from? And what did her sudden appearance mean for Mr. Davies, who had always so carefully guarded his private life from prying eyes? Eleanor, continuing her work, really narrowed her eyes slightly. She knew the answers to all these questions, and this knowledge gave her true pleasure. She was sure that Mr. Davies was currently experiencing a genuine shock, and this was only the beginning. Mabel was just the first swallow in her carefully planned strategy. She closed her eyes, recalling the details of her meeting with Mabel. It wasn't a chance encounter. Eleanor had meticulously planned every step, every detail. She knew that Mr. Davies liked to talk about himself, and once, during one of his many monologues, he mentioned his odd but very artistic cousin Mabel, who lived somewhere in another city and whom, to his great relief, he rarely saw. He described her as annoying, eccentric, and capable of disrupting his peace at any moment. Eleanor remembered this, and now, with the help of a few phone calls and a carefully constructed legend, she had arranged an unexpected meeting for Mr. Davies with his beloved cousin. Mabel, it turned out, was not only artistic, but also a very cheerful and adventurous woman who happily agreed to play along with Eleanor. She was ready for anything for a good prank, especially since it concerned her arrogant cousin, whom, in her own words, she had long wanted to put in his place. Eleanor mentally congratulated herself on her successful choice of ally. Mabel was a real find. Her appearance in Mr. Davies' office was just the first act in this little comedy, and Eleanor was already anticipating what would happen next. Mr. Davies had no idea what a whirlwind of events awaited him. He was used to being the main character in his life, but now he was about to find himself at the center of someone else's play, where he was by no means playing the main role, and Eleanor was determined to make his performance unforgettable. Chapter 3: Family Dinner and Unexpected Revelations. The evening of that same day promised to be no less eventful. Eleanor, comfortably settled in an armchair with a volume of her favorite novel, was waiting for Mabel's call. She was extremely curious to learn all the details of how Mr. Davies met his beloved cousin and what had happened after their triumphant departure from the office. The call came exactly at 8, as they had agreed. "Eleanor, darling!" Mabel shouted cheerfully into the phone, and even through the receiver it was clear that she was in high spirits. "I could have guessed. Tell me everything in order." Mabel began to gush about her adventures. It turned out that Mr. Davies, though stunned, still tried to politely get rid of her, hinting at urgent business and important meetings, but Mabel was not so simple. She smilingly announced that she had come to town especially for him and couldn't possibly leave without visiting his wife, Mrs. Davies, about whom Mabel had heard so much and admired so greatly. "That's when he flipped," Mabel exclaimed cheerfully. "He turned pale, then red, started stammering, and then suddenly he offered to go to their house for dinner. Can you imagine, Eleanor? He did. He clearly wanted to keep me under his control so I wouldn't do anything outrageous, but it was so sweet of him." Eleanor barely held back her laughter. The plan was working perfectly. Mr. Davies, trying to prevent a potential catastrophe in the form of Mabel, had trapped himself. "And how was dinner?" Eleanor asked with genuine interest. "Oh, it was something else," Mabel laughed. "I immediately befriended his wife, Clara. She turned out to be a very nice woman, a bit weary, but with a great sense of humor. We immediately hit it off. I told her about my life, my travels, well, creative pursuits. And Mr. Davies sat there nervously eating his soup, occasionally casting pleading glances at me. It was priceless." "And what were you telling her?" Eleanor asked cautiously. "Oh, all sorts of things," Mabel giggled. "For example, I told Clara how my dear cousin, when we were children, always dreamed of becoming a ballerina and would rehearse for hours in front of the mirror in his mom's tulle curtain. Clara almost choked with laughter, and he, Davies, turned crimson like a tomato and started mumbling something about childhood fantasies and memory errors. But I know. He's so artistic, our dear one." Eleanor imagined the scene and couldn't help but laugh. Mr. Davies, a man who so meticulously built his image as a successful and serious businessman, was now forced to listen to these secrets from his childhood. This was exactly what was needed. "And I also told Clara how as a student he tried to court our neighbor, old Miss Evelyn, who was deaf as a post. He gave her flowers, wrote poems, and she always thought he wanted to fix her drain pipe. It was so touching. Clara was rolling on the floor with laughter, and our dear cousin kept trying to change the subject, but he couldn't." Eleanor listened and realized that Mabel had exceeded all her expectations. She wasn't just entertaining Clara, she was subtly but very effectively destroying the image of the ideal man that Mr. Davies had so carefully constructed around himself. Clara, most likely for the first time in many years, was learning something truly new about her husband, and this was apparently very amusing for her.
"And when I told her about his special eating habits," Mabel added, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, She just burst into tears of laughter. It turns out he always claimed to eat only the most exquisite food, but in reality, he secretly loves to eat sausage sandwiches and wash them down with soda pop. Clara said she now understands why he's always so mysterious after his business meetings. Eleanor shook her head, admiring Mabel's talent. She wasn't just revealing secrets, she was doing it with such humor and charm that no one could be offended. And most importantly, she was creating an invisible bond between Clara and Eleanor, based on mutual amusement and a slight schadenfreude towards Mr. Davies. "And what happened next?" Eleanor asked, feeling her own spirits lift. "Well, it got even more interesting," Mabel said mysteriously. "I told Clara that I planned to stay in town for a few days and that I needed a room. And then Mr. Davies, without consulting anyone, as if on cue, immediately offered to let me stay with them. He, of course, rationalized it by saying that relatives should be together. But I know he was just afraid that I would start wandering around town and telling all his acquaintances about his ballet interests." Eleanor clapped her hands. It was brilliant. Mr. Davies had invited his punishing cousin into his own home. This meant Mabel would have full access to his private life, his daily routine, his secrets, and Eleanor would be in the loop for everything. "So, dear Eleanor," Mabel concluded, "our plan is working like clockwork. Mr. Davies has already sweated 3 times this evening, and I haven't even started yet. You have no idea how many more stories I have in store about our dear cousin. I have his school diaries, his letters to his first love, well, you get the picture." Eleanor indeed got the picture. Mr. Davies was caught big time. He, accustomed to always being in control of the situation, now found himself a prisoner of his own relative, who, moreover, was in league with his subordinate. And most importantly, he couldn't blame anyone. After all, Mabel was his cousin, and all her stories were, in essence, harmless. But it was precisely in this harmlessness that the cunning of Eleanor's plan lay. She wasn't going to harm him. She was going to destroy his carefully constructed image, expose his weaknesses, and make him an object of universal amusement. "Excellent, Mabel. Keep up the good work, and keep me informed. I can't wait to find out what other skeletons are hidden in our dear Mr. Davies's closet." She hung up the phone, and a wide smile lit up her face. The righteous anger she felt towards Mr. Davies was now replaced by anticipation. Anticipation of how this smug man would try to cope with the flood of information Mabel would unleash on his family and his associates. And this was just the beginning. The most interesting part was yet to come. Eleanor felt that her story was just picking up speed, and she was ready for any, even the most unexpected, twists. Chapter 4: The Final Touch and the Unexpected Climax. A few days later, Mr. Davies's life had turned into a veritable hell, spiced with endless anecdotes and awkward situations. Mabel, without wasting a minute, settled into his home and, to his horror, became the life of the party. She not only charmed Clara, but also quickly befriended all the neighbors, telling them the funniest and most ridiculous stories from Mr. Davies's childhood and youth, from his school nicknames to his first clumsy attempts at courting girls. Not a single detail went unnoticed. At the office, Mr. Davies looked haggard. His usually impeccable suit was slightly crumpled, and dark circles had formed under his eyes. He avoided Eleanor's gaze, knowing full well that she was probably aware of everything happening.
Whispers and snickers in the corridors grew louder as he passed. Employees, who had previously regarded him with apprehension, now couldn't help but smile. Mr. Davies, once unapproachable and self-satisfied, had become an object of universal amusement. This was precisely what Eleanor had aimed for. One morning, Eleanor arrived at the office a little early. In her hands was a box, which she carefully placed on her desk. When Mr. Davies entered, he was astonished by what he saw. A large, brightly colored poster hung on the wall near Eleanor's desk. It depicted a young Mr. Davies in a ballet tutu, gracefully performing a pas. The caption read, "Dreams come true. Are Mr. Davies a ballet star?" Mr. Davies, seeing this, choked on his morning coffee. His face instantly turned crimson and his eyes widened in shock. He shifted his gaze from the poster to Eleanor, who sat at her desk with an absolutely unperturbed expression, as if nothing of the ordinary had happened. "Eleanor," he hissed, approaching her desk, "what is this?" "Good morning, Mr. Davies," Eleanor calmly replied, looking up at him. "It's a gift from your cousin Mabel. She said she found this photograph in an old family album and thought it would be perfect for our office to cheer everyone up."
Mr. Davies was furious, but could do nothing. The poster was harmless, but incredibly humiliating. He couldn't just take it down without confirming that the story about the ballet tutu was true. He was cornered. At that moment, Clara, Mr. Davies' wife, entered the office. She looked fresh and rested, and a slight smile played on her lips. "Darling, I decided to stop by to take Mabel to the train station. She's leaving," Clara said cheerfully, and then her gaze fell on the poster. She froze for a second, then her eyes widened in surprise, mixed with delight. "Oh, Robert, it's you!" Clara exclaimed, pointing at the poster. "Mabel told me about this yesterday. You were such a charming child." Mr. Davies groaned. He felt the ground disappearing from under his feet. His wife, his own wife, was delighted with this humiliating poster. "Clara, darling," Mr. Davies mumbled, trying to compose himself. It's just a childhood prank. It's not worth paying attention to." "Why not?" Clara moved closer to the poster, examining it with genuine pleasure. "It's so sweet. You never told me about your ballet hobby, and I always wished you were more artistic." Eleanor, watching this scene, barely managed to keep from laughing out loud. Her plan had exceeded all expectations. Mr. Davies was utterly defeated. He stood in the middle of the office, surrounded by laughing employees, his wife admiring his childhood pranks, and a poster hung on the wall that was meant to remind him of this humiliation every day. At that moment, as if by magic, Mabel entered the reception area. She looked impeccable, in a new, elegant suit, and carried a small suitcase. "Oh, dear cousin," she exclaimed, seeing Mr. Davies. "I just came to say goodbye. And of course I couldn't help but make sure my little gift was already in place. I hope everyone likes it." Mr. Davies cast a look at her, full of such desperate pleading that Eleanor even felt a fleeting pang of pity for him. But it was only a fleeting feeling. "Mabel," he said through clenched teeth, "I think it's time for you to go." "Oh, yes, of course," Mabel smiled cheerfully. "Clara, darling, I'm so glad we met. I had so much to tell you about our Robert. And believe me, that's not all. I have so many more stories in reserve." Clara laughed. "I'll definitely look forward to seeing you again, Mabel. You've made my life so much more interesting." Mabel walked over to Eleanor and, leaning down, whispered in her ear, "Excellent work, dear. He'll never forget this." Then she waved to everyone,
and, together with Clara, left the office. Mr. Davies remained standing alone, completely broken. His smug smile had disappeared forever. He no longer looked down on Eleanor, no longer made her ambiguous hints. He simply worked, avoiding her gaze and trying to appear in the office as rarely as possible. Eleanor, on the other hand, felt like a winner, and the ballerina poster remained on the wall as a perpetual reminder that underestimating a woman is the biggest mistake a man can make. And ever since then, Mr. Davies would, before making a remark to anyone, cast a quick glance at that poster.